to introduce our partner to you and hear her powerful message and the work that we are doing together, let me introduce to you the chair of the NEA Black Caucus, Cecily Myart Cruz.
Good morning, board. Good morning. Teresa, roll the clip, please.
Desk duty. You believe that? Who becomes a cop for the paperwork? I want to go where I'm most needed. Like school. Helping kids stay off drugs. And, well, it's a sad state of affairs, but with all the school shootings nowadays, kids need cops to protect them.
Look, I think we can all agree that kids should be safe in schools. But the fact is, while there have been a few rare cases of heroic cops who've intercepted guns on school campuses, there have been many more cases where they haven't. It's far from clear that putting more cops in schools is the best way to stop school shootings. But even if you disagree with that, there's still something very important you need to understand. Putting cops in schools actually hurts the kids we're trying to protect.
I can't wait to be just like Officer McQuack, inspiring kids to say no to drugs and keeping them safe in school.
Quack, quack, looking good today, JP. Hey, Jossie, good luck on that big chemistry exam.
Thanks, Officer McQuack.
Yeah, that's the role we like to imagine school cops play, but the hard reality is, when you bring police into schools, they start treating kids like criminals.
Oh, McQuack, easy. It's just normal kid stuff.
Yeah, it used to be, but as we've gotten tougher on crime, we've also gotten tougher on kids. In the 1990s, a new policing philosophy known as the broken windows theory promoted zero tolerance for any type of criminal behavior.
First it's a window quack, next you're dealing quack.
Today, this philosophy is widely discredited, but back then it was so pervasive even schools adopted it, and they're still using it today.
Oh, I like this zero tolerance idea. First kids are shooting spitballs, next they're shooting rival gang members. Defacing school property, you're expelled. McQuack, take her out.
For a spitball? Isn't that a little excessive?
Yes, but 69% of school cops are involved in routine discipline cases that in the old days, schools would have handled themselves.
No, let the officer handle it.
Today, 40% of schools have at least one full-time cop, and those schools have arrest rates 5 times higher than those that don't. With cops in schools, even something as minor as disrespecting a teacher or using a cell phone in class can turn into a criminal offense.
This duck is pissing me off. These kids are just being kids. Give them detention, not juvenile detention.
Exactly. And that is the biggest problem with having cops in schools. Most states don't mandate special training to work in schools, so they just rely on their regular police training.
This doesn't cover schoolyard squabbles at all. Guess I'll treat it like a riot.
Seriously? Pepper spray in a school?
Yeah, this really happens. And that's not the only heavy artillery coming into our schools. At least 100 school districts have received military equipment through the same federal programs that equip SWAT teams. 5 schools even got grenade launchers.
This is madness.
It sure is, Dom. This is Zakiya Sankara-Jabar, the national field organizer for the Dignity in Schools campaign.
And apparently overly aggressive animated ducks. We've gone way overboard with police presence in schools. So many kids get filtered into the criminal legal system for non-criminal behavior nowadays. There's actually a term for it, the school to prison pipeline. Kids are getting expelled at ages as young as preschool. And when kids are framed as criminals in their formative years, they often end up playing a part. Being arrested in school leads to higher dropout rates and makes you more likely to be arrested as an adult. And the worst part is, these overly punitive aggressive disciplinary actions aren't doled out evenly. 70% of in-school arrests are Black and Latino students, and Black students are suspended and expelled at 3 times the rate of white students.
We're not keeping these kids safe. We're throwing the book at them.
That's right. Instead, we need to support students and address root causes positive interventions like peer mediators and restorative justice practices so we can address disciplinary issues in the classroom. Also, we want adults to be able to better understand childhood development and to check their own assumptions and biases about children of color and Black children in particular. Schools need to be a welcoming environment, not an imposing or an antagonistic one that doesn't do anything except keep kids out of class.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
All right, you ruffled enough feathers for one day.
Don't worry, guys, I've got this. Okay, class, let's get back to our
Zakiya Sankara-Jabar. She's the National Field Organizer for the Dignity in Schools campaign, challenging systemic disparities of pushouts in our schools. Prior to this, she co-founded Racial Justice Now. She is a natural organizer who galvanized Black parents to tackle school districts' harsh discipline policies. Zakiya is unapologetic in who she is and what she believes in. This is her life's work. It's deeply personal because it's a lived experience. Her then 3-year-old preschool baby boy was suspended in pre-K multiple times. She pulled him out of that preschool, and after doing some research, she realized he and they were not alone. It was part of a bigger systemic problem. She fights against anti-Black racism specifically, as well as healing in the Black communities. She is a badass and isn't afraid of speaking the truth that others don't have the courage to say. It's not enough for us to say that we do racial justice work. We must say that we live and breathe this very work. This fight for racial justice is what our babies need, and we want Zakiya standing in that fight with us. NEA board, please give a warm welcome to my sister, Zakiya Sankara-Jabar.
Wow. Good morning. Thank you, NEA. Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, Lily, Becky. I am happy to be here. Happy to be a partner with the NEA and many of the directors in this room. Many of the folks across the country that I've also worked with in the past. I want to just start off and tell you a little bit about myself before I jump into the PowerPoint presentation. As Cecilia mentioned, this work is very deeply personal for me. I got into this work because of my own experience as a mother, as a parent, pushing back on the preschool to prison pipeline. At that time, I had no idea there was such a thing until I actually experienced it. But in 2019, we commemorated 400 years of Africans being brought to this country. And so I am a descendant of enslaved Africans in this country. My family was brought here in Virginia, ended up in Alabama, working the land for free for years, as we know. And my family also participated in the Great Migration North from Alabama to Ohio. And so I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and lived in Ohio for many years before relocating here to suburban Washington, D.C. The experience that I had with my son when he was 3 happened in Ohio. I lived in Dayton at the time, and he was attending preschool. And I remember, being so excited because this preschool had done a really good job of marketing itself, as the #1 preschool that you would want your child in. In Ohio, we have something called the crawl test. So that's the kindergarten readiness test. Where my Ohio folks at? Where y'all sitting at? All right, here we go. So, the way they marketed themselves, like, all of our kids, they passed that test. So, as a parent, as a good parent, you always want your children to have better than what you've had, right? So I did everything that I could to make sure he could get into this school. I sacrificed, paying an exorbitant amount of money. Preschool is expensive in these private preschools. Shout out to everybody that's fighting for universal pre-K. Damn. So, at any rate, I ran into barriers almost immediately. This particular preschool, the vast majority of the teachers were white. The administrative assistant was white. The director of the preschool was white. At that time, I wasn't looking at it from a racial justice lens. I wasn't very politicized at the time. I was just working my job part-time and in college full-time. And so I didn't even walk in there, with any kind of chip on my shoulder or thinking that I was walking into something that would literally change the trajectory of my life. It was a barrier even getting him into the school. I remember at the time I received a federal subsidy called Title 20. So folks who don't know what that is, Title 20 is a subsidy that you can get to help parents who are working in a school help you subsidize your child care costs or preschool costs. And I remember when I took my approval letter to this particular school and to the administrative assistant, just how rude she was, how loud she was, and obnoxious she was about the fact that, oh, we only take so many of these. We have people who can pay for the full tuition and all these kinds of things. And I was like, oh, wow, in front of everybody, just that kind of experience. But I was very determined. I did not allow that to deter me. Once I actually got my son into this school, however, is when the issues started. Literally almost immediately. He wasn't in the school a week before I began to get phone calls. I'm sitting in class. This is supposed to be, where he's attending while I'm sitting in class pursuing my higher education. And I was just dumbfounded by some of the things that they were complaining about because, as the video mentioned, a lot of times kids are being criminalized for normal childhood stuff. He was a normal 3-year-old. They called me about temper tantrums. They called me about something about him refusing to transition. I had to find out what that was. What do you mean? He's refusing to transition. And I would be remiss not to mention that this experience also taught me about how we are lessening play-based learning in early childhood education. Because I learned that when she was telling me about this whole refusal to transition, that they literally, they wanted kids to be on something for 15 minutes, and if they didn't move, it was a problem. And I was like, what? I was like, well, if he's learning right there, if he likes that particular PlayStation, let him stay there. I was literally dumbfounded. They wanted to suspend him and eventually expel him for normal childhood behavior. So all of those kinds of things combined, when I looked at the overall demographics of the school, when I looked at the demographics of even the students and the other parents, I was noticing a trend. I noticed that those of us who were parents of black boys were being targeted. Even when I talked to some of the parents, who had black girls in the school, they didn't have the same experiences as those of us who had sons in the school. And I was very disturbed by that. And that to me set off a questioning series for me, because I said something is not right about this, and I cannot accept the kinds of narratives and the kinds of things that the particular teachers and administrator at this particular school are saying about my son. So that's how I launched Racial Justice Now, which is still based in Dayton, Ohio, doing work all across the state. The Ohio folks in here probably know about House Bill 318, which was passed into the law in 2018 in the state of Ohio, which pretty much bans suspensions and expulsions for pre-K through 3rd grade students in the state of Ohio. That was work literally led by poor and working class black parents in Dayton. And it took us many years, but we had to organize around the state. We went to Cleveland, even went to Zanesville. There's black people in Southeast Ohio as well. And we realized that no matter if you were living in the rural part of the state, if you were living in Cleveland or Dayton or Cincinnati, no matter where you lived, there was always a disparity that had black children at the bottom of the bucket. And we knew for us as parents and also for our allies in the community and for all of our partners, we knew that that's not something that we wanted to live with. We knew that we could not sign up to continue to have an underclass or produce an underclass of people because students were being pushed out of school, literally. And Ohio, unfortunately, also has a very low graduation rate for black students. For black male students, it's even worse. It's around 50%, which is unacceptable. Again, producing an underclass. Now I am working as a national field organizer at the Dignity in Schools campaign, where we have members all across the country. We're in 26 states. We have about 115 members in those 26 states, including here in the District of Columbia as well. I want to talk to you a little bit now about some of the work that we're doing to help work with educators across the country. There we go. Some of the work that we're doing to work with educators and other partners across the country. The vast majority of our members are made up of what is called base building groups. Those are folks who are actual parents and young people themselves. We do have some educator groups. So we have a couple of educator groups. There's Teachers Unite, that's based in New York City. If you have not heard of them, they are a group of badass educators who have been working very hard in the New York City school system to push for positive approaches to school discipline and also pushing for racial justice in New York City schools and restorative justice. We also have a Black Education Network, which is based out in the Bay Area, San Jose, California. They have been doing work particularly around African-centered education and curriculum and making sure that we're decolonizing the curriculum. I heard the debate earlier about Dr. Seuss, so that's definitely interesting. So there are definitely groups and educators across this country who are working on a myriad of issues, not just on school discipline, because we know all of these things are interconnected. So at DSC, we were formed out of the experiences of Black parents in Mississippi. A lot of people don't know that. I want to make sure I tell that story, but it was Black parents in Mississippi and Black grandparents and other folks who came together and said, you know, this is ridiculous, the amount of time that our young people, our children are spending outside of the classroom, and began organizing to push back on all of the just out-of-school suspensions for every little thing. Again, normal childhood behavior, and again, disproportionately impacting Black students. So in that spirit, we developed what is called the DSC Model Code. All of this information is up on our website. It was first developed in 2012, and this is a model code that's based on what we want a student code of conduct to look like in our schools. And we want student codes of conduct that are affirming, not student code of conduct that we have that are punitive, completely punitive, and don't see the humanity in the students, don't see the humanity in their families. And so again, this was the help developed by, these are all of the different buckets that we focus on: participation, dignity, making sure that we are also engaging parents, right? That we're not pathologizing our parents and making parents the bad guys when it comes to educating our children. Again, many parent groups within the Dignity in Schools campaign all across this country, young people as well organizing. So we want to make sure that we are being inclusive and not patronizing to families, parents themselves, Black and brown parents especially, who oftentimes are also pushed out of schools. So one of the campaigns that we have in the model code is the Solutions Not Suspensions campaign. So you can see from this slide that you know, we still have 2.6 million students who are experiencing suspensions and expulsions in this country every single day throughout the year. That's something that we cannot continue to stand for. I want to point out, though, just several years ago, that number was 3.3 million. So I do want to say that some work has been done, and I want to applaud the folks in this room. If you're working to make sure that you're changing policies in your districts at the state level and working in concert, yeah, please clap. If you're working in concert with those parents and young people, we appreciate you because we need co-conspirators in this work. We have to have educators of all stripes, again, seeing the humanity in the students that's sitting in front of you every single day, seeing the humanity in their families, in their cultures, and where they come from. We have to have that, and we have to be working in concert to make sure that we are pushing our state legislatures, to push our local school boards, if you're mayoral control, pushing the mayor to do the right thing when it comes to educating our students. So I want to make sure. So this is just a little bit more, again, about Dignity in Schools campaign. Wanted to highlight some of the organizations that's also doing really good work around curriculum as well. So in Dayton, the organization that I co-founded, Racial Justice Now, we pushed for curriculum changes within the local school district as well. We also pushed and had the very first Office of Males of Color created, because what we found in the data, particularly in Dayton, the demographic of the student who was most suspended, most expelled, had the lowest graduation rate was Black, male, and disabled. That's the demographic of the students, at least in that particular school district. And so when we began to look at the data again and begin to have these conversations again with parents, we recognize that since this is the demographic of the student that's least served in this district, then we must have a targeted resources for this particular demographic to make sure that we're scaffolding them, to make sure that we're looping in parents, making sure that we're pulling in community partners, and making sure that we're doing the correct investments to make sure that they graduate with a world-class education. That's how we were able to push the local school board the very first year from general funds to invest $500,000 into creating the Office of Males of Color in Dayton Public Schools. That's only the third office across the country. The very first is in Oakland, California, in the Oakland Unified School District, led by the very capable Chris Chapman. We consulted with Chris in Oakland. There's now one in Seattle Public Schools, Office of African American Male Achievement, and also in Minneapolis Public Schools, Office of African American Male Achievement. So these kind of targeted programs are happening because there are parents involved, because there are community partners involved. Some foundations have gotten involved. I know the Rakes Foundation that's based in Washington has gotten involved in making sure that we're helping school districts to resource these kinds of things. And then we have educator co-conspirators who are like, because Chris worked as an educator in Oakland. He's like, this cannot continue to happen. He's since now the director of the Office of African American Male Achievement, but he saw the need and worked with parents and community members and pushed the local school board to do the right thing. So there is hope, and I'm hoping that folks listening to this can also go back to their local school district and push for some of these kinds of interventions, because we're seeing that they're working. We also developed a comparison tool. So I wanted to make sure that I actually brought you all tools that you can take back to your communities and to your school districts. So this tool was developed to help you look at your current student code of conduct in your school district and match it up to what we're calling for in the Dignity in Schools model student code of conduct, where we're grounded in human rights. We're grounded in making sure that you're welcoming in parents and their dignity and not pathologizing parents, right? Not patronizing parents. So doing a comparison between what's currently in your student code of conduct and matching it up with the DSC student code of conduct. So wanted to make sure you all have tools. This is an example. Wanted to make sure you all saw that we did in a community meeting where we had a presentation. I believe this one was in North Carolina for all the North Carolina educators in here. So this is just an example of strategy chart answers that you can literally take. All of this is up on our website. It can be printed off, so just wanted to let you all know that. And we recently updated it in 2019 to include our Counselors Not Cops campaign, which I'll get to and talk a little bit more about. So again, the community toolkit. We also have a template evaluation form. All of those kinds of things are available up on our website. So positive approaches to discipline, right? We know that restorative justice is one of those positive approaches to discipline. That's one of the ones that has really kind of taken off in a lot of different places. I know some districts and some schools use PBIS. At Dignity in Schools campaign, we really believe in restorative practices and restorative justice when it's done with fidelity. It has to be done with fidelity or it will fail. The other point that I have to make is restorative justice and restorative practices is not a program, it's a philosophy. You literally have to change how you think about discipline. Discipline, the definition of it is about learning. It's not about being punitive. Like, you really have to change your philosophy and how you think about engaging with students. We also believe in peer mediation, right? All of those things that I talked about in the clip on Adam's Ruin Everything. So limit, and this is the other piece that's really, really important to us. We have to limit exclusionary discipline policies. You know, we know that there are times where, you know, exclusion may be appropriate, but not for the vast majority of things that we're seeing young people actually being excluded from the classroom and from schools altogether. Some schools have been very creative. They've created, you know, like restorative practice rooms where there's like all kinds of wonderful things happening, where there's de-escalation tactics happening around yoga, meditation. People are doing all kinds of really creative things to get young people to feel safe in schools. We want them to feel safe, but we also want them to also be able to process their feelings. You'd be surprised, but a lot of young people and their families, I gotta keep bringing it all together, and their families are really dealing with a lot of things in their communities. Many families, and I have to continue to speak about Dayton, live in food deserts, right? They live in communities where they don't even have access to a hospital. There's all kinds of things that's happening around the school building that a lot of us don't have any direct control over, which means that we have to be cognizant of that and making sure that the schoolhouse is a place of refuge and safety for a lot of students. That is so important. Please clap, yeah. So that's the other thing that's very important to us. The guidelines for exclusion for us, you know, as you can see, please take pictures of this as well. I'm happy to send out the PowerPoint if folks want it as well. We don't think young people should be suspended for any of those things that's listed at the bottom. Being late for class, you'd be surprised that young people are sometimes suspended for that. Young people are sometimes suspended for being out of uniform. That's completely ridiculous. That should not be happening. Violating school dress codes, insubordination, defiance. Those are things, those are things that young people, from our perspective, should not be suspended for. Those are learning. They can learn from that kind of behavior. The other thing is keeping in mind, right, childhood behavior. Where are my middle school teachers, right? so as you can imagine, like in middle school, guess what's happening? But guess what's happening with middle school students? Like, they're going through puberty. So their brains, like, all kinds of crazy stuff is happening, right? So we shouldn't be like pushing them out, right? And I get it, it's tough, right? You know, maybe they need to go take a break in the restorative justice room, do some yoga, do some meditation, but we don't think that they need to be suspended and pushed out of school for that. Right. So again, wanted to make sure that folks in this room have actual tools to go back with. So I want to also highlight Dignity in Schools campaigns, other campaigns. So Counselors Not Cops, let me spend a little time on that because that's something that is extremely important to our base. I have to say, especially to black parents, black and brown parents, but especially to black parents. We've seen in the news in the last couple of years, because of the advent of social media and cell phones, where we have seen SROs literally take young black girls and drag them out of their seats, manhandle them, a grown man doing this to a young girl. That has propelled many of our members who already knew these kinds of things was happening. It just wasn't as, you know, publicized as it is now that we have social media. But these things have been happening in our schools for many years and for a long time, very unfortunately. Because of that, at Dignity in Schools, our members pushed us. We came together, and over several years, we came up with the Counselors Not Cops policy platform. Again, that's also up on our website. The executive summary can be printed off, but also the actual document itself can be printed off. But it's from the perspective of everybody that's involved in our campaign. As I mentioned, we have educators that are a part of our campaign, actual co-conspirator educators who are in the fight because they live in the communities where they teach. They see the humanity of their students, and they don't think that young people should be criminalized. And so they're on board with pushing for more social workers, more counselors, more therapists, more nurses, and pushing their local school boards in their states to repurpose money that they have set aside for cops for all of these other professions. And that's something that is extremely important because we have moved away because, as you saw in the clip, because we have this zero tolerance policy that just swept this country. There's so much money into criminalizing young people, and so we have to begin to move away from having the regular presence of law enforcement in schools. And so we have the entire campaign around that, making sure that we're working to remove law enforcement in schools. We do not have a community yet who has completely removed police from schools, but we have the Black Organizing Project, which is a member of the Dignity in Schools campaign based in Oakland, California, who's really close to pushing Oakland Unified to just get rid of that policy and to get rid of the relationship that they have with the Oakland Police Department. The other one is the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act. So our members did a lot of work with our national partners, the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, to really push for a lot of things in Every Student Succeeds Act. One of them is meaningful parent engagement. Meaningful parent engagement, right? So make sure that, we need co-conspirators again in the room. If you feel like your school district has not participated or your state has not participated in meaningful parent engagement, we need some co-conspirators speaking up in those rooms if we're not in there saying, hey, where's our parents? Because we need to make sure that they're at the table to help make sure that we're implementing policy that is actually gonna be conducive to the families that we're serving. That's what it's all about. Solutions, not suspensions. Again, we've talked about that with the model code. There's all kinds of really good, meaty materials that you can use and tools that you can actually take back to your community to push for changes if you have not already made significant changes. The other thing that I want to say when it comes to changes is making sure that implementation is done well. What we found is that people across the country have actually done a really good job of changing local policies. Some in places, state policies have been changed, but the implementation process has been murky, very murky. And so we're looking at different ways of making sure that how do we make sure that once the policy is actually changed, it's implemented again with fidelity. Again, the same thing around restorative practices, because we're seeing some people say, oh, restorative justice doesn't work. It does work if it's done right, if it's done well. The other thing that I really want to make sure I mention is because we're living in this digital age, this 21st century, right? We're starting to see that folks are using data algorithms to recriminalize people. We have a member in Twin Cities in Minnesota who just recently pushed the St. Paul School District not to enter in what's called a joint powers agreement, where they would have just freely shared all kinds of horrible data with the police department, with the sheriff's department, with public health, and even asking whether or not their parents received public assistance. And what they were gonna do was create a score and say, well, this child, when they graduate, is more likely to be a criminal. That's nuts. So we're seeing that now we're using data algorithms to predict, if you will, who's gonna be a criminal or not. Here's the problem with that. They're already using data that's problematic, because most of the data shows us that we have an overrepresentation of Black, Native. In Minnesota, Native students are very overrepresented in suspensions and expulsions, right? Brown students. So if they're gonna use that kind of data, then guess who all the criminals are? Right? So we're working now nationally with different folks to make sure that we have a data for public good campaign where we're not using data to criminalize minority populations. And then finally, I want to hit on our culturally relevant curriculum campaign. We have got to decolonize our curriculum. The vast majority of students in this country are Black, Brown, Native, API. We cannot continue to teach from a Eurocentric perspective to students who don't see themselves in the curriculum. There is entirely too much research that shows that when you have a culturally relevant curriculum, when you have a curriculum that embodies the student population, they can actually see themselves in the curriculum, that they do so much better in classroom, on assignments, even on tests. They do so much better because they see themselves in the curriculum. The other thing that's with that particular campaign that some of our members have also been pushing for, as we just ended our Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action for those of you who celebrated in your communities, is also a push for more Black educators. More Black educators, more Black teachers in the classroom. That has been something that has been critically, I know, important for me because I started off this conversation by talking about, my son and my experience in Ohio. Well, we now live here in suburban Washington. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland now, and they attend Montgomery County Public Schools. I'm pretty happy with MCPS, and I'll say that my son's experience in MCPS for the most part has been pretty positive. One of the things that I'm happy to report is that he is in AP advanced placement classes now. That's a rarity to see a young Black male student in AP classes. In fact, he is the only Black male student in his AP English class right now. But I bring that up because it was a Black teacher who recognized his brilliance. It was a Black teacher who said he can do so much better, and I get that the other educators are kind of distracted by his behavior, because my son is a more kinesthetic and experiential learner. We haven't even talked about learning styles. I know some people like, oh, that doesn't exist. It exists for my kid. No, it does. I mean, he's very kinesthetic. He's always been more experiential, more tactile. That was a problem for some of his educators. Like, why can't you sit still? Why can't you just sit there? He's fidgeting, and so it's disruptive to the classroom environment. And so a lot of educators would only see that instead of seeing that he was a leader, seeing how bright he was. But it was this particular educator. They tested him, of course, and he scored through the roof. And she was like, I can't believe he wasn't in AP classes in Ohio. I was like, no. I was like, most of the time it was just concerned about the behavior. But just making sure that we're recognizing the brilliant and humanity and the diverse learning styles of young people, the diverse learning styles of your students is so very critically important. So I'm glad I had a chance to talk a little bit about that. Call to action. I wanted to make sure that before I left this podium, is just make sure that I left you all with a call to action. Something that is extremely important, is also supported by research, is building strong, authentic relationships. For me, I am a very active parent. At the beginning of the year, I get each and every one of my kids' parents, there's teachers, their email addresses. I introduce myself, I tell them a little bit about my son, tell them what to expect, and I'm real with them. I'm like, this is who he is, this is how he learns, this has been our experience. And I found that 9 times out of 10, that kind of warm kind of introduction works. To build that relationship with that educator. And they hear from me once a week. Some of them don't like it, but some of them do. They're used to me now, right? Because I email like once a week. All right, what's up? Tell me what's going on. That's something that's really important. And then from the educator side and the administrative side, I think we have to move beyond just like the cookies and milk kind of, engagement of parents. Engage parents, and when you're engaging parents authentically, you're also sharing power with them. You're bringing them in some schools, they have local school councils. I think that's something that's in Chicago, where parents are actually a part of the decision-making body of that particular school building. I think that's something that is critically important, that we continue to move forward on. And if that's something that you don't have currently in your school, go back and explore a way that can be done. Because I think that when parents feel like they're not just being engaged in a way that's kind of patronizing, they'll show up and show up very powerfully. But you have to be willing to hear and accept what they have to say. Affirm, affirm, affirm. I am a huge believer in affirming students. I know that, again, I talked about it earlier, how young people are coming with all kinds of issues, and educators as well. We all need affirmations. I think that's something that is critically important. I found that students really soar, when they feel and can connect to their educator and know that you really care. I know that you all know this, but that's something that I feel like needs to just be restated. Communicating with parents. Sometimes, it can be a barrier, because I know that for educators, you're already dealing with things that are just overwhelming. There's things that's being, brought down from the state level, from the local level. There's all these different boxes you have to check off. But I do think that it's critically important to keep parents involved, to keep parents a part of that process, and communicate in a way, hopefully, that's effective. I got you. I'm almost done. Work to create a positive school climate with student families and administration. I've found that when you have a school climate that is positive, again, implementing affirmations, all of those different things, you have less likely a need to even suspend and expel, because the climate is already positive and there's already a sense of safety from the young people and even for educators. And then finally, please, please, please use resources from Dignity in Schools campaign. There's all kinds of things. Again, our model school code that you all can use back in your community, all of that's up on our website. We just updated it in 2019, so there's even stuff in there around school code or dress code violations, how to handle those different things. We've also updated it with the new LGBTQ section that helps you to affirm your LGBTQ students. And then finally, our Counselors Not Cops campaign, which is something that is really taking off around the country. And we hope that we have some educators who will be some co-conspirators with us in the community to push for these positive school changes. Thank you so much for allowing me to be your speaker today.